Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this discussion that is being brought to you by the Black Small Business Association of California. I'm your host, Kaim Morton, and for tonight's discussion, which is entitled Fixing the Social Contract for Black America, it's a discussion on our status and efforts in terms of the Black economy, as well as the topic du jour right now, which is police brutality and police reform. As we get into this discussion, we're going to talk about a couple different things. It's going to talk about police reform, defunding the police versus abolishing the police. What do those kind of efforts look like? What does that mean? And at the same time, then we're going to shift after that to talk about the Black Economic Plan, because at the heart of all of this is institutional racism. And we need to figure out what exactly, what are the steps that we need to take in order to properly move forward, especially now since we have this moment in time. Now, since we have this, I would like to introduce our panelists for this evening. First, we have Miss Charity Chandler Cole. Hi, Charity.
Hello.
If you take a moment and let the audience know who you are for this evening's panel.
Hi, everyone. I'm truly blessed to be here with you tonight. I'm Charity Chandler Cole. I'm the president of the Black Los Angeles Young Democrats. I also chair the board of a phenomenal criminal justice reform organization called the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. I've personally been impacted by our very unjust systems, such as the foster care system and the juvenile justice system. So I'm excited to share my views and perspectives with you tonight.
Great, thank you. Next, we have Dr. Stephen Noble.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Dr. Stephen Noble. I'm a board-certified cardiothoracic surgeon, which means I specialize in the #1 killers of Americans, which is heart disease and lung cancer. Those two diseases are very important to the Black community because, again, the healthcare disparities suggest that we suffer at higher rates of high blood pressure, diabetes, and thus we suffer from higher rates of coronary artery disease or diseases of the heart, as well as lung cancer. I serve as a clinical advisor and investor to companies that look at trying to change the healthcare disparities in our community. I look forward to this engaging discussion tonight.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Stephen Walker. His audio is not up here.
Sorry, that was my fault. Thank you, Kaim. Hi, my name is Stephen Walker. I am currently the director for correctional health for the California Correctional Peace Officers Association. I am also the board chair for the Child Abuse Prevention Council of Sacramento. I am a member of Black Youth Leadership Project and a number of other organizations that are specifically focused on addressing and preventing young Black men and women from entering the correctional system and the criminal justice system in total. So I'm happy to be here and to engage in this conversation because I've experienced everything that we're talking about firsthand, and I've seen it firsthand.
Thank you. We're very pleased to have you with us. Next, we have Mr. Chris Lobson.
Hey, Kaim, thank you for having me. I'm Chris Lobson. I am an activist, organizer, legal researcher, and a whole bunch of other things here in the city and county of Sacramento. I've been active in organizing and advocating on state legislation, in particular right now, ACA 5, which is the state's Prop 209 repeal bill. Been active on AB 3121, which is the state's reparations task force bill. I've also been active in a lot of the local work here in the city of Sacramento as well. I'm a member of ADOS Sacramento. We are one of several groups that form the ADOS movement, which is a movement for reparations and a Black agenda. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. And then we have Pastor Danny Jefferson.
Hi, Pastor Danny Jefferson, pastor of the Rehoboth World Outreach Center Church in Vallejo, California. I also serve as the chairman of the board of the Elite Public Charter Schools here in Vallejo. Also, I am the president of the only fraternity that matters.
We'll have to see that.
Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated here in the Solano County area. I'm the chapter president. And then also I am the immediate past president of the Community Democratic Club of Solano County, which is one of the largest Democratic clubs in our county, and have, served in several different capacities, NAACP leadership, different other things as well. Glad to be here, though. Thanks so much for inviting me.
And thank you very much, Pastor. Now, I would like to bring everyone in for our conversation. And as we start with our first set of questions, and this is going to start on police reform, police brutality. So there are a couple things that are happening now at this moment. You've got movement for defund the police, and you've got same time people also calling for abolish the police. I'd like to throw it around and start with you, Miss Chandler Cole. What is the difference between the two? Because as I've talked to folks, they understand one in terms of abolish, they don't understand what defund means, and then for opponents who just don't want to see any change within the policing activity, it's easy for them to conflate the two. So if you could start with that.
Yes, and I know I'm going to touch on this much deeper later, so I'm going to give you a one-sentence statement on this. And defund the police essentially means abolish the police while abolishing the police in its current state and the way it currently exists, and reimagining public safety.
Okay. Stefan, I'd like to go to you next, if you can start on this issue as well.
Actually, I think you're right. They're using the opportunity of this not being well defined to do what they've always done, which is create some other narrative and direct people's attention away. The reality is we do need to restructure, redesign the purpose of policing in America, especially in our community, where when it comes to the relationship with Black people, because our history is based upon them being slave patrols, and we have to redefine that.
Mm-hmm. Chris, I want to go to you on this. As we've gotten
Sure.
definitions now, you've been working in the legislative sphere, and you've been working on some legislation around this. So if you could talk about
For sure. And I just want to address the question directly. From my understanding, defunding the police is one step toward abolishing policing as we know it, as Ms. Charity talked about. It is about one, divesting from the over funding that policing and all that comes around policing, the mass incarceration system around it, divesting from that funding and then rerouting that funding into community programs that we trust and that we know really, truly make people safe. And it's also about imagining, as Ms. Charity talked about, imagining a world in which we don't need to call the police for what we call them for now, that we can handle the things that are happening in our communities on our own, that we have community control over our own public safety.
Yeah. So in doing that, from my experience when I've worked as a field deputy for different local electeds, over the years, I have seen just issue upon issue put on the police department. Oh, we have a homeless problem? Send the cop out to deal with it. Loose dog? Send the cop out to deal with it. Crazy person on the street. Don't know whether they're having a moment of crisis or the person is drunk.
Right.
But we send the police out to do it. So if we're going to reimagine what policing looks like, Dr. Noble, I'd like to ask you, it's like, what is that? Where does that put us in terms of funding? What's some of the first steps, where we'd go with that?
I think some of the first steps goes with education of the community and really discussing amongst the community, what is it that we need? What is it that we expect, individuals to do when we sit up here and call 911? all too often the default has been, for those situations, call 911, and unless it's a fire or unless it's someone having a heart attack, it brings the police. And I think we really need to assess what are those situations within our society, within our community, in which we don't necessarily need, someone with a gun or someone who may look at individuals as a threat to themselves. And so it really comes down to community involvement, getting the funds to the community to help the community decide what is it that we need here, because what is needed in one county may be totally different than what's needed in another county. And so it really is a matter of trying to get the funds back into the community so that they can do what they see fit for their own local environment.
Right. So then, Pastor Danny, on this same topic, as we look at reimagining
Sure.
what police work would be, you mentioned also that's like you're running a charter school. So what are some of the areas in terms of that where if we weren't putting money directly towards policing or agreements where police have probation substations or police stations on high school campuses,
Yeah, absolutely.
kind of look like?
In fact, we need to reimagine the police activities and their roles, because, for instance, as you mentioned, on our school campuses, we had a superintendent here many years ago, Dr. Ramona Bishop, and in fact, she's from the Sacramento area, who refused to have resource officers in our schools. And it caused quite a stir because, the other folks wanted the police on the campuses, and she had already seen the data that showed that if you have police officers on your campuses, many times it will lead to other things, arrests, some things that take place even on the weekends. Those police officers would have access to the students and to their records. And she knew at that time that it was not necessary to have police on campus because it was something that we could deal with ourselves. That's just one area. But many of you have already discussed the various areas in terms of like homelessness, and there's several things that the police do not need. We don't need any police involvement. So the divesting or the defunding of the police is basically to take those monies and put it into other resources that are less threatening, that actually serve and support our communities. And with doing that, we'll have a better outcome than what we're seeing right now. I don't know if you saw it today, but your president today
We're not.
completely.
Oh, yeah.
Watch
Yeah.
it.
Well, he did. He said he didn't want to do that.
So what did he? So yeah, you were mentioning that the president today took some action. What was the text of that?
Well, the action that he provided was, well, he had some things that were very interesting. So, for instance, he talked about the no choke. He put in his executive order that he has said that you shouldn't have the chokehold, with the exception of when the police feel threatened, which is a bad thing, because we know that that's how they shoot us and kill us in the first place, because they always claim they feel threatened. But one of the things that he did, instead of divesting or defunding police departments, he actually added funding for certain things. And so he's bringing funds to bolster law and order as opposed to defunding.
So many things in there.
Kaim, can I jump in and just follow up really quickly? Just to underscore the point, and because it was part of the question that you asked me also, and it's the way that police are funded right now is a deliberate choice. We've chosen as a society in many ways, but through our local governments, particularly through our city councils and our mayors and our police chiefs, and our sheriff's departments, our district attorneys, we've made a deliberate choice, a deliberate political choice to fund these kinds of things, police officers, guns, tanks, trucks, surveillance.
Right.
We made a deliberate choice to do this. And what we've seen from the president today sounded to me a lot like a doubling down on this outdated, not working system of funding things that really don't keep us safe.
Mm-hmm. So in that, Stefan, I'd like to ask you from your experience, in particular, where do we kind of start with retraining? I mean, because even if we are changing the construct of what policing or what public safety is like, you know, does that mean we're still trying to recruit the same guys out of the military or out of high school?
Yeah, I think that's one of the fundamental areas that we need to focus on. Is if you don't change the system, you can change who you hire,
Mm-hmm.
but you're going to end up with the same result because the system is toxic. I don't know if anyone has read this book, but The Lucifer Effect explains it perfectly. It's a book written by one of the proctors of the Stanford experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And it slowly but surely contaminates you. It changes who you are. So until we change the fundamental operation of our criminal justice system, and specifically the police and DAs,
Right.
we're going to end up with the same byproduct.
So when you talk there about DAs, as we shift a little bit in the conversation, because there's multiple reforms being proposed now. There's a reform effort that's coming from the streets, and now you've got Attorney General Becerra, who is proposing some reforms. 3 of the largest police unions that are proposing reforms. The president's executive action. You've got a bill being that's been proposed by the Democrats in Congress. You have one that I know on the Republican side, Senator Tim Scott is working on. But when you look at all of these things kind of coming, and it kind of gets you to, it's like accountability. And even as we are looking to change what law enforcement looks like, we've got a district attorney here in Sacramento. We these articles from a couple years ago when Stephon Clark was murdered. Over 30 different instances where there was an opportunity to hold an officer accountable, and it wasn't. So it's, for me, there's 2 things here. It's like, one, is this officer, of the court, the district attorney or AG, not doing their job? Or 2, are there other fundamental changes that we need to make to law and then into policy so that it's very clear as to who they should be guarding within an institution? So it's a little bit of a statement, but I'd like to, kind of, Chris, I see your.
Yeah, I want to jump in there really quickly because one, I want to give a shout out to all the activists and organizers on the ground here in Sacramento and throughout the rest of the state who have been really on the ground, pushing from the ground up for real reform in policing and also in on the fight for accountability. When we talk about DA Schubert and her mishandling of the Stephon Clark case, I think the answer to your question, Kaim, is both of those. Mm-hmm. It's one, her not doing her job, right? And then 2, the decision on Stephon Clark's killers, who are still walking around, now, and who could be fired right now by the city of Sacramento's city manager, and who are refusing to do it, and who are being called on to fire those cops right now. But the DA Schubert's case, the Stephon Clark case was, I think, right before AB 392, and I think Stephon Clark's case prompted the renewed effort to change use of force standards from the reasonableness standard, right? The reasonableness use of force, right, to the necessary use of force standard.
So AB 392 was a bill by Dr. Shirley Weber that was from this California State Assembly that was signed into law. And so go ahead with that.
Right. And so, and that changed use of force standards here in the state of California only. But the answer to the question is that it's both. We have DAs who are not doing their job. You mentioned 30 other instances. There are probably over a dozen or so killings here in the city of Sacramento, over the past several years. And then it's also the fact that we have a legal structure that is permissive, that says it's okay to kill Black men and Black women, to kill them, and nothing is going to happen to you. And so it's both.
And can I add, and what I wanted to touch on earlier with defund the police as we get into it, it's definitely both. I 100% agree with that. When we talk about the power to be able to do or not do what our elected officials are doing, it comes down to budget, and our budget determines our priorities. So when we say defund the police, we're saying that it's time for radical reimagining of public safety in America. As my colleague pointed to, the police came into existence as slave catchers to return slaves that were deemed as property back to their slave owners. It was never created to protect our communities, and a system that was designed to incarcerate and control cannot be reformed, period. What we're asking for, especially in LA, is a people's budget that is centered around restoration and not punishment. Law enforcement does not make communities safe. Resources do. Transforming conditions do. So defunding the police and investing in universal aid and crisis management from trained experts, ensuring our communities have housing security, food security, and job security is what keeps our communities safe. We do that with funding housing, healthcare, mental health, more programming in public schools that are ran and operated by people that look like the kids in the schools, providing, resources for success and healthy outcomes such as financial literacy, debate, economics, ethnic studies, and real Black history. If you go to these white neighborhoods, they have all of that. And what they don't have are police officers harassing and terrorizing them. They are not afraid for their lives when they get pulled over for forgetting to put their blinker on or simply driving while Black. If the police were so safe and law enforcement made communities safer, then all the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies will be living in the hood and falling asleep every night to the sounds of sirens and ghetto birds. But that's not the case, is it?
So I wanted, as we kind of go on that point, I also just want to kind of bring up the point, as much as I mentioned DA Schubert, you also have to look at AG Becerra, who prior to this has not been a strong advocate of police reform. Additionally, you had our current U.S. Senator Kamala Harris, who opposed body cameras on the police. So there's something within the system on that end that we need to dive into more. What I want to get to in a question is Charity talked about education, but for Pastor Danny, if you can kind of talk about in this conversation, as much as we're talking about police reform, it goes into the levels really of institutional racism and a system, as Stefan was talking about. So within the work that you've done within your school, within the church, within your other activities, how have you sought to try and educate people on what institutional racism is, and then how they can actually be anti-racist?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll give you a recent case in point. Just recently, we had a march and rally as it relates to George Floyd, but also all families that have been touched by this, not just him, but nationally. We all can also see how this has taken place in our local cities too. But what we wanted to make sure that the participants in our march understood that we are not just marching, but we have a legislative agenda. And so we had 5 or 6 points that we educated those that came, as well as even post our march and rally, about what we would be trying to do to change this. Because if we don't educate them about the system, if we don't educate our brothers and sisters about the system and how things work, then they will be focusing on the wrong individuals. So for instance, a lot of times what happens is when one of these killings take place in our communities, they go down to City Hall. They go deal with the mayor, or they go deal with city councilmen, when many of them have nothing to do with what the outcome will be. it is the DA that you just talked about. That really is the person who many times determine what the outcomes will be and how it's going to be handled. So we've educated them about the 5 things that we were talking about in terms of legislation. And Dr. Weber's, one of those was ACA 5, Dr. Weber's California Civil Rights Act. We also talked about the reparations bill was another one of our things. We also asked and talked about that we want to see all of these situations be taken over by the state attorney general. But now that you've kind of pointed out, even in some historical situations, that didn't work, that makes us have to kind of even think about that. So we do a lot of education immediately after our march. We Dr. Dante Quick, who is the lead organizer for the march that we had a conversation with a local DA from Contra Costa, and she gave us some information and gave us insight on how we should attack that. So we bring in speakers about those things, but then we also talk about the legislative agenda that I think and the process that most of our people do not sometimes know about. They get very passionate without really having the knowledge of how the structure works, because it's definitely systemic.
So, Dr. Noble, on this point, want to kind of shift just a little bit as we're talking about police interactions and the effect on health of Black men, of Black Americans. As we were kind of prepping for this session, you had made a comment, and I'd like you to kind of like go through more of that and just kind of your thought process, where you had stated it's like, if we could get, a heart monitor, on Black folks when they're getting pulled over, what would we see,
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a situation, COVID-19, this police brutality crisis, are 2 systems coming down on the Black community at the same time. As Charity, pointedly expressed, the police system wasn't created. I mean, it was created to really put us in chains. At the same time, the healthcare system wasn't necessarily created to keep us healthy. And so a lot of the atrocities that you've seen in medicine, what was done to Black people. And so, the point that I was making yesterday was that if you put a wearable device, a Fitbit, on every Black man and had them pulled over by the police, I'd be very interested to see what their heart rate and their blood pressure would be. When you find out that, and when you know that the rates of high blood pressure, diabetes are higher in Black men and women, when the rates of heart failure are higher in the rates of Black men and women. So when a Black man gets pulled over, they have higher blood pressure, potentially heart failure, and their blood pressure is elevated because of the stress, the anxiety of being pulled over. They get pulled out of the car. And so when they get arrested and they start to say, you know what, I can't breathe. Part of the reason why they can't breathe is because of the underlying health condition that they have. And we saw it very interesting how initially in the autopsy case of George Floyd, they tried to blame his underlying health condition as to why he had experienced, the death that he did. Never mind the fact that he had 4 individuals, sitting on his chest. So COVID-19 in the midst of police brutality has been the wake-up call that America has needed, that Black folks have known for a while, that this healthcare system is not working for us because of the rates of high COVID-19 deaths, as well as this police reform is more than needed. It is pivotal. And so what we have is a police brutality pandemic, as well as a COVID-19 pandemic, all happening right now in 2020 on Black America.
Thank you. Chris, I want to shift a little bit because there are a couple things that are, happening in the state,
Yes.
proposals. 2 that I want to kind of talk about first is there's AB 1196 by Assemblymember Mike Gibson of Los Angeles, and then AB 1185 from Assemblymember Kevin McCarty out of Sacramento. So if you can talk a little bit about those.
Sure. So, and both are police reform related. 1196, I believe, is involving the chokehold, if I'm not mistaken, the quarter. I'm going to get the medical term wrong here. But it's banning chokeholds, right? And that is something that needs to happen. First of all, absolutely needs to happen. Right now, though, we have on the books right now, we do have parts of our law that prevent use of force that are not being enforced right now. So it's one thing to add to the list of things that folks can't do, right? Choking me, preventing my oxygen from getting to my brain, right? But we come back ultimately every time to this accountability question. What happens when you do it, right? What happens to me when you do it?
Two things is one, you had talked earlier about Assemblymember Weber's bill, AB 392, which is recent.
Right.
That should encompass use of force. But then the other bill that was out there, was actually signed in 2018 by Governor Brown, was SB 1421 by Senator Skinner, and that would release, records of misconduct. To your point, we do have some tools out there, and part of the question then gets us to, it's like, if we have some of these tools, how do we make sure
enforcement is key? And I actually had the privilege of helping to advocate on 1421 too. And again, I want to shout out the folks who pushed that through. That's been, I think, a very helpful tool because we finally got to see all the bad records. We finally got to look inside of these officers' jackets, inside of these officers' records, and finally got to see who's actually out on the streets and who is actually in our communities. And not surprising, we didn't like a lot of what we saw, right? So that was a powerful tool. That's actually being replicated right now, I think, in many states across the country, as we've seen this newer push to get policing reform happening on the state level. But it's only one step toward, I think, what ultimately is the right claim and the right demand from the activists on the ground, which is community control over policing, right? It's easier for me to know that we have folks in our own communities that are policing our own communities, and I know the people, right? Whereas I don't need a 1421 if we have community control and community power over the policing. And I think that's the right direction to go in. Things like 1421, things like 1136 are helpful, but we're at a point right now where we need more than just helpful trimming around the edges legislation. We need transformative legislation around policing. And to be honest with you, that I think is only one part of the transformation. ACA 5 was mentioned. This is the bill, and I know we'll come to this.
We get to that in a moment. So with that, we've got a couple of jurisdictions already that have taken, much larger steps in reimagining what policing could be. Minnesota City Council just voted on this. Camden, New Jersey has been doing this for a couple of years, and then I also just read in a breaking news report that the LA City Council has voted now 11-3 to pass on to have staff start identifying between $100 and $150 million that could come from the LAPD's budget to go into other places. So if any of you kind of been following those other areas, Camden, Minnesota, or other areas, I'd like you to kind of talk about what you've seen there, and that might be then applicable specifically as we're working here. Chris, and then Charity.
I'll actually let Charity go first.
Okay.
Well, I've been very focused on what's happening in LA, and I'm very proud of what my other cities are doing. But I will say this publicly and on the record that 150 million is not enough. It's actually insulting that that's all they're considering. When we talk about what's owed to our community, when we talk about what needs to actually happen to transform and heal our communities, to reimagine public safety, it's going to take a lot more than $150 million. So I'm grateful that they're starting somewhere, but there's no applaud for our city council, passing vote for $150 million, because they didn't do that. We did that. Us getting out in the streets, us protesting, us demanding that they defund the police. We did that. So now they really need to step up further and come up with solutions for what needs to happen so that we can really invest in our communities. It's a start, but it's not anywhere close. And as we're talking about, the cities and, the police departments, figuring out, where in their budget they can, reduce funding and reallocate it to our communities. That's just the tip of the iceberg. When we look at the police's, the revenue they're receiving, the funding they're receiving, it's not just from the city budget. Look at our schools. Look how much our schools invest in bringing police onto our campuses. We spend $80 billion on incarceration alone. So as we look at the revenue, we can't just, starting with police is a starting point, but we really need to look at cumulatively how much money is being put into oppressing our communities and hold their feet to the fire, hold them accountable, hold our elected officials accountable. It's real cute for you to introduce something. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. But I need you to fight to make sure it gets passed, and I need you to fight to make sure it's enforced. And that means us not just marching in protest, but us marching to the ballot and holding them accountable and voting them out or voting them in if they're not doing their jobs.
Thank you. I
do want to follow really quickly because Charlie is on point, and I want to dive this home. This is about power ultimately, okay? And so it's not just about forcing a rerouting, a divestment, and then a rerouting, and then an investment into community programs that we trust. It's about community control over how the decisions on that money is made. We don't just want the money, we want power over how the money is spent, right? So folks are talking about things like participatory budgeting, right? Other ways to community control the funding itself, and then the implementation of whatever that funding produces, right? This is ultimately about transforming the power relationship between the Black community and the state. And this takes us all the way back to 1619, okay? Right? We've had a power relationship with our state that has been abusive, horrible, bad, right? Okay, and what we're seeing are the symptoms of that obtuse, abusive power relationship. And so right now is the time to go for the power.
Yes.
So as we kind of pivot now, and we're at a halfway point in our conversation, in continuing the discussion on institutional racism and reform, but shifting it over to what the Black economic plan needs to be to really help, push out of this. One point, a couple points I want to lead with is, one, there's a article from the Washington Post where they had studied what happened in New York and other areas that were touting all of these drops in crime due to the broken windows policing strategy. They said they went back and studied it later, and a 2006 Chicago Law Review found that they actually attributed those drops in crime to a 39% decrease in unemployment. So as we use that and kind of segue over to what we need to talk about in terms of the Black economic plan, we need to kind of look at, with the collective focus of America and white America and Black America and other persons of color on this moment, and institutional racism due to the pandemic. As you said, Dr. Noble, people can't go anywhere. They can't run from this. They have to kind of sit in it and reckon with what's happening. We need to talk about a plan for the Black economy, because even if there's a reinvestment and we get, there's more community buy-in on what's happening, how do we frame that? How do we, make sure that we're not only getting the dollars that are correctly needed, but where they need to be, because that needs to start in terms of, I'd say, the discussion on the Black tax, the tax on being Black in America. The fact that if I'm earning 70 cents less, and at the same time I'm getting charged more, on a car loan, on a house loan, and also having less services within my neighborhood. And then because I live in a neighborhood that might be predominantly Black, my home equity is increasing less than my white counterpart. want to start there. And so, Charity, you and I had kind of talked before in prep, and this gets us into investments, and of course, the discussion will segue into reparations. But I want to kick that to you there.
Yeah, I would say taxation without representation is what we are currently living today. We are paying more money than we should out of our pockets for something we're not even getting. And so as we talk about defunding the police, as we talk about taking away from all these other areas and investing, yes, we're talking about investing it in healthcare, mental health programming, et cetera, but the savings we can get beyond, from divesting, so the state where we could put it beyond funding the system that threatens and not protects, it can go towards reinvestment in our oppressed communities to eliminate the disparities in economic income and asset wealth in the form of, let's say, a basic income program for one, tax credits for first-time Black home buyers, regardless of their income, interest-free business loans, so that we can build back the very thing they destroyed in Tulsa, in Rosewood, our business, our wealth, our pride, and our legacies. We can support job growth and business recovery. We could also eliminate Black student loan debt and make college free. We can raise poverty guidelines for public assistance so that two-parent working poor households can be eligible. These aren't handouts. We are owed all of this and more. And I haven't even touched on reparations. This is low-hanging fruit that can be addressed right now by divesting from an oppressive, racist system of policing and investing in a true public safety infrastructure and in opportunities that, once correctly put in place, will automatically eliminate the oppressive conditions that lead to crime and violence outside of what is imposed by police within our communities.
So on that point, and as I, kind of take this around the horn, there are kind of two facts of things that I picked up in research and getting ready. One, you're all familiar with the GI Bill and how that was introduced, for veterans coming back from World War II. So the United States put about 95, and this is, following World War II dollars, about $95 billion into the economy there. Now, about 2% of that went to the 1 million less of the 1 million GIs, Black GIs who came home. So as an example, in terms of what that was used for, it was used for people to go to school, get a higher education, to buy a home, to buy land, to build wealth. So what that kind of equates to, and just kind of an example, at this point in time in the New York metro area, there were 69,666 VA loans in 1950. 69 of those went to Black GIs. So that's 0.1%. So what I'm getting is that, what I want you guys to kind of talk about in dismantling the system is that it's having the money there is one thing, but the reason why they were prevented from getting that money is because of redlining. Because of institutional racism. You can't buy a home here. You can't get a loan here. I'm not going to sell you this house here, even if you have a loan. And at the same time, the only educational opportunities that were open to African Americans really then were HBCUs, and those were so oversubscribed. And then the rest of the folks were getting really turned down from other institutions. So if we're going to do that, how do we make sure we get the money back in and to where it needs to be?
Kaim, can I take that if you don't mind? I wanted to underscore what Charity said. I support everything Charity said. I am an advocate for the ADOS movement. Reparations for American descendants of slavery is at the cornerstone and the heart of our agenda. We live with us, as those of us who descend from persons enslaved in the U.S., with an accrued disadvantage. Okay, that accrued disadvantage has been accruing for hundreds of years, and you see the symptoms of that right now, right? Whether it be in policing, whether it be in jobs, poverty, but ultimately and most importantly, wealth. Okay, and by wealth, I'm speaking specifically about what you own minus what you owe, or the net value of your property. Right now, the median net wealth for an ADOS, a Black American here in the United States, is $1,700. In LA, it's $200. In Miami, it's $11. In Boston, it's $8. Okay, this is specifically the result of accrued disadvantage over hundreds of years. There's no way to educate yourself out of that gap. There's no way to financial literacy yourself out of that gap. The true solution to that is a federal reparations program. Right now, a black high school dropout, a white high school dropout has more wealth than a black college grad. Right now, a black head of household working working full time has less wealth than a white head of household who's unemployed. Okay, reparations at the federal level is the solution. And right now, to be honest with you, we're in a moment. Right now is the time to strike while the iron's hot. The state of California is moving on its own legislation, and I'm active in that fight too. But the true answer to this is a federal reparations program.
So I want to kind of kick that around the horn to get some responses. Stefan, I'll start with you. But and as we talk about in that's like, yes, if going back to my points, like if we're to if reparations, not just in the state but on the federal level, will pass, how do we make sure that it's properly invested? Because it's like education, financial literacy is one thing, but if we don't undo the black tax, we can't get there. So Stefan, I'd like to hear your thoughts on some of this.
Yeah, look, I'm very much like you, Kaheem. I was surprised at the number of times that Black America has built wealth and it was taken from us. Mm-hmm. It's not just Tulsa, which I'm from Tulsa and was blown away 4 years ago at a family reunion when they took us there. Mm. It's not just Tulsa. It's not just Rosewood. It's Wilmington. It's New Orleans. It's Memphis. It's New York. The list goes on and on. And the fear that I think is instilled, unfortunately, in our communities is that when we build something, we don't have the police protecting us because in each one of those circumstances, historically, the police were part of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, look, I'm a retired sworn peace officer. Mm-hmm. When I figured out what was happening to me, I tried my damnedest to work within the system to reform it. But that's another issue. We can come back to that at another time. But the issue is we have the intellectual capacity. We have the ingenuity. We have the willpower to do this in our own communities. But we got to have somebody protecting us when we do it from the individuals that are flat out, that are racist and want to take what we've done, what we've accomplished. They continue. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. I'll get started.
So Pastor Danny, on that and bringing you into this part of the conversation, I also want to throw out another fact for you guys that the New Deal, of course, that was passed and that, from 1933 to 1940, where Congress, pumped in about $50 billion into the American economy. Mm-hmm. Going back in terms of institutional racism, the deal was actually held up by congressional representatives from the South who wanted to make sure that there were two specific amendments that were attached to it. One, that domestic and agricultural workers were excluded from the bill. 65% of Black Americans work there. Secondly, they wanted to make sure that local control over how the money was spent was pushed out. So, and at this time, Black Americans could not join unions, could not be part of some of the things. So, Pastor Danny, as I kick it to you, and then to Dr. Noble, assuming that there's some kind of money coming in a large amount, because we've gotten other smaller amounts of money from cities, from counties, and to do different things. What are some of the ways that you might see that being better invested? And I know in particular, it's like, and I'm looking at you, that the Black church has had a historical role within our community of trying to lift it up.
Yeah, absolutely, through education and other means. But I was thinking about, because it really goes to what we've seen here recently, the PPP plan.
Right.
They can come up with money to do whatever they want to do. And as was already stated by two of my colleagues, already stated that home ownership is the basis of wealth, of building wealth in any community. I would love to see some sort of plan where, through the reparations process, that African Americans could be able to own their own homes and perhaps have a forgiveness loan program, as opposed to just low interest rates. That's good. Because I can remember, even under Bush, we've lost all of our wealth during 2007 and 2009. Those years, we saw systematically where we were, targeted through predatory lending, and many of us lost homes during those times. People walked away from homes. If we could get that wealth, if the federal government would then now do a program kind of like this PPP, where they're doing forgiveness loans, that would tremendously give us a leg up in the sense of being able to have home ownership and be able to build wealth. The second thing, which was also mentioned, was dealing with student loans. The second major thing that's going to happen in the Black community is the Parent Plus loans. Parent Plus loans is like owning another house or two. You will be forever. I have 3 children. I had one that have graduated from Spelman College. That was what, 50-something thousand a year. I have one at Morehouse College, and I got one coming out at Clark Atlanta University. That is crazy. That right there is affecting so many of us throughout the whole United States. And if we could get these loan forgiveness programs, as well as home ownership, that would tremendously help. The other thing is, I think we need to reinvest in education, even from the K through 8 or K through 12 area. I don't know about you. I know a lot of people don't believe in school choice, but I believe in it 100%, because a lot of our schools are underperforming. They're not educating our kids, and we need to have other options to reinvest it. See, even that education is a reinvestment. If we have children that are better prepared for a global society, then we are able to be a better citizen. We'll be able to build more wealth, and it will be the better because of it.
You're talking about really creating and nurturing Black talent.
Absolutely, and that's the key. That nurturing of the Black talent is the key to changing this whole narrative.
So on that, Dr. Noble, I'd like to bring in this and not just talk about health, but entrepreneurship as well, in this area. And as we were kind of getting ready for this call, beyond entrepreneurship, we're also talking about, as Pastor Danny said, it's like the PPP loans, but access to capital, and making sure that we're actually getting money to actually do some of the things that we need to, because the rate at which loans for Black businesses are approved, seems, pretty low.
So yeah, it's a great point. I think the other institution that we need to talk about in the Black community is hair care. When the slavery first ended, one of the first institutions that, the first 2 institutions that Black people could control their own environment was the barbershop and the church. The barbershop was the first place in which, Black men could sit up here and enter into the realm of entrepreneurship. Some of the first life insurance companies were developed by individuals that owned barbershops. The first man that had the successful open heart surgery in the world was a Black man that was a former barber. We need to get back to the basics of hair care and health care. The barbershop represents just that. Back in the day, healthcare was delivered at the barbershop. The reason why the barber pole is red, white, and blue: red represents the arterial blood, blue represents the venous blood, and white represents the staff that the patron would grab onto when they were getting cut. So we need to look at delivering healthcare where individuals go. as a cardiac surgeon, you know, again, heart disease is number one killer. Black people go to their hair salon, their hairstylist, and their barber more often than they see their physician. If we can deliver healthcare where people get their hair care, basically delivering healthcare to where people are at, we would have a healthier community. At the same time, we're building up that financial institution, the barbershops, the hair salons, those institutions that did not benefit from the Triple P program, because these barbershops are independent contractors. You may have one barber, one owner, but then you have several independent contractors. Those independent contractors did not qualify as employees under that Triple P program. So let's really reimagine changing the system of healthcare for the Black community by delivering healthcare where we go, and that's hair care.
So you mean in terms of like changing the system of delivery, you've seen now a move for more school-based healthcare clinics, and I know in the Latino community they've developed promotores, which are basically healthcare navigators for folks. So you're looking at like how can we kind of do the same thing for the Black community? Is that correct?
Exactly. So, you know, studies have already been done that suggest that men that go to a barbershop in which there are blood pressure monitoring programs within that barbershop have lower reductions in their blood pressure. The studies have been done in the 70s. It's been reimagined in the 90s. The biggest issue is trying to get payment for those programs. You know, the healthcare system just didn't see a benefit all in all as far as having healthier, you know, Black people for all intents and purposes. But what we have discussed throughout this, you know, hour-long discussion is that the backbone of America since its inception has been the Black community. So a healthier Black community leads to a healthier America and a healthier American economy.
So you're talking about, you know, not just leaving us up there as a canary in the coal mine, but, you know.
Exactly. Yes. Getting your blood pressure checked on a regular basis, getting your diabetes checked, having that sort of interaction and that connection from someone that you trust that can sit up there and link you in to your primary care provider or someone that you trust, and then connecting you with a network of Black physicians. We have those networks. Those networks of Black physicians exist. We need to tap into those and really leverage that ability.
Okay. Couple of things I want to go over here as we're, you know, getting close to our time. But as much as we initially talked about reparations and bills, I want us to talk a little bit about the two bills that are out there now, both by Dr. Weber and Chris. You started on that, Charity, as well. There's ACA 5 and then AB 3121. So Charity, sort of, you know, if you could give us about 2 minutes on that, and then we go to Chris.
Yeah, I'll basically say this because I know we have a few minutes. ACA 5 is basically repealing Proposition 209 and restoring affirmative action. And AB 3121 is reparations, or doing a study for reparations. And I want to make it very clear that as we talk about getting into all that, there's a social contract. You know, the title of this programming is Our Social Contract with America. And a social contract is essentially an unspoken implicit agreement in society of how we are to treat one another. The social contract is not honored when racism exists, when Black people are killed and unjustly targeted, profiled, and incarcerated, denied opportunities to healthcare, to education, to jobs, to housing, and when Black people are oppressed and terrorized. There is no contract if the law and other citizens in our society do not hold up their end of the bargain. So to that end, what we are seeing is a racial contract, which has historically deemed that white lives and white property are of greater value than Black lives. We've been told by the media, from society, from the movies we watch, and even our history books that white equals innocence and Black equals guilt. And let's be clear, the racial contract we have is not partisan, and it exists across party lines. But what we are seeing now is that the injustices we've been experiencing, coupled with COVID-19, is pushing the racial contract into the open and forcing society to choose whether to acknowledge the fact that racism does still indeed exist, contest it, or blatantly deny it, while also still denying the very gruesome history that brought us here. What we need to do now with these bills is take advantage of the momentum we already have and demand more. We're not asking for something we're not already owed. We're asking you to hold up your end of our social contract and allow us to have equal playing field, equal footing in the world so that we can thrive and we can be successful. It's a shame that we have to go to the extent of passing bills to say, hey, I'm just as qualified as you, if not more. And this is what we have to do to be able to get the jobs and education and healthcare we need. And more than anything, we are owed a hell of a lot. So fucking pay us. Period.
Chris, as you jump into this, I know that I want to bring up for folks at ACA 5 in terms of undoing what was then Prop 209, that it gets into a lot of other things because there are actually things that we could be doing to try and help move the Black community forward, but are prevented because we cannot specifically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Black.
We could be pushing contracts specifically to Black-owned businesses. We could be pushing education funding specifically to Black kids and be able to say we doing it specifically for Black kids, okay? Which is something that we have been not doing, partly because of Prop 209. And I want to just shout out Charity again. That was fire. That she's absolutely right. ACA 5 is absolutely moving right now in the California legislature. It is a bill that will put a repeal of Prop 209 on the ballot for us in November. So the first thing that has to happen is we have to get this through the legislature. Yeah. Then it comes to us in November, and we have to decide as a new generation, do we want to be able to correct the very bad things that have been done against us as a people? ACA 5 is in hearing tomorrow in the Senate, California Senate Labor Committee, 9 a.m. You can call into the hearing and express your support for ACA 5 starting 9 a.m. Tomorrow. That is June 17th, Wednesday. ACA 5. We have a script for you. If you want a script, we have the numbers to dial. I'll make sure that we have them up on the BSBA page where most of you are viewing this right now. ACA 5 passed overwhelmingly last week in the California Assembly, 60-14, which is more than the 2/3 vote that it needed. Similarly, AB 3121, which is a bill to create an 8-member task force to study and then develop reparations proposals for African Americans. That bill passed overwhelmingly as well last week in the California Assembly, some 58 to 15 or something, more than the simple majority that it needed. That bill is going to the Senate Judiciary Committee, if I'm not mistaken, very soon. We don't have a hearing date yet, but same deal. In the next couple of weeks, you'll have an opportunity to call in to make your voice known on those bills. But don't wait for that. Call your legislators right now. Call them right now. Call them tomorrow morning. Make sure that they are voting aye on ACA 5 and aye on AB 3121.
So you're bringing up a good point in terms of talking about legislators as we kind of get to the end here. Stephan, Dr. Noble, I want to kind of give you guys the last words on this, because as we've talked about a lot of things, there's where we're still kind of missing from is between now and November. What do we need to do? Where do folks need to show up? So Stephan.
Without a doubt, look, the only way we're going to ensure that, as Charity touched on earlier, to identify priorities in our community are met is ensuring that legislators that we have selected and supported or opposed know that if they're not allocating the funding that we need to our communities, they're going to be gone. If you sit and I salute everybody that was out marching and protesting, but if you end it there, then 45 is a repeat, and we're going to get what we got coming, which is more of the insanity we saw for the last few weeks.
Right. Dr. Noble.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo that sentiment that first and foremost, we need to remain vigilant. COVID-19 is still out there. So as much as, the police brutality, it's important for us to get out there and march, remain vigilant, wear your mask, social distancing when possible, wash your hands, but you got to get out there and vote. America, at this point in time in our history, we have always looked at, the Black woman as far as being able to protect us from being able to sit up here and lead us. And unfortunately, Michelle Obama's not running. But, I think that, it now more than ever, we need individuals, like the Sister Charity, like, some of the other individuals that are sitting up here being nominated for vice president. And I think we really need to remain vigilant and get out and vote.
Well, thank you. I'd like to thank all of you for your time this evening, the audience, your time. I know that we're, based off of the topics that we covered and things that I've just been noting down here that we can dive into, even deeper. Would like to have the opportunity, if you all are willing, to have you back for some future discussions along the same topics, especially as this continues to evolve. And the last thing I want to leave folks with is really, again, in kind of historical context, is going back to World War II, when the call was issued for Black soldiers to come and fight and defend America. They initially didn't want to, because they're like, why should I go fight for something that doesn't believe in me here or allow me to believe in it? What ended up happening is Black soldiers went to fight and said, yes, I will defend this country. I will defend its institution, its ideals. And the promise is they developed what was known as the Double V, the Double Victory campaign. We're going to fight fascism abroad. We're going to fight racism at home. Now, while I think we've done pretty well on the abroad, as evidence here, we've still got a lot of work to do here. So I'd like you all to keep that in your minds, as you continue your work, and that we need to continue our effort towards this double victory. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Yeah, brother.
Yes, thank you.
Take care.
Yeah.
Great job.